By the late 1950s, the story on America's highways sounded almost the same wherever you went. If you were standing at a small-town depot, chances are the coach rolling in wore a GM badge. From the old silver sides of the 40s to the mighty scenic cruiser, then the PD 4104 and PD 4106, General Motors didn't just build buses, it practically owned the idea of what an American highway coach was supposed to be. Greyhound, the big dog of the business, was tied into that world almost completely. Engines, parts, training, even styling, everything lived inside the GM ecosystem. But out on the road, not every route looked like a straight, wide interstate. Some lines twisted through the Rockies and the Appalachians, climbing grades and dropping into narrow valleys. Others wound through small towns with tight depots, sharp corners, and streets that were never meant for a 40-foot giant. On thin, low-demand runs, a big coach was overkill. Too long, too heavy, too much to feed. Greyhound needed something different, a shorter, handier 35-foot coach that could still run with the big boys. Up in Canada, there was a modest builder named Motor Coach Industries. MCI was small, but Greyhound put serious money and faith behind it, hoping to grow a true counterweight to GM. Out of that mix of dependence and ambition came the MC-5, the first MCI coach built to step onto American soil and fight on GM's own turf. As Greyhound pushed MCI toward something bigger, the company itself was already climbing through its own evolution. In the years before the MC-5, MCI had been turning out the Courier line and a string of early MC models: the MC-1, MC-2, MC-3, and MC-4. These were modest machines, closer to commuter and regional shuttle coaches than the long-legged highway rigs Americans knew so well. But the MC-5 marked a break from that humble past. It was the moment MCI stepped out of the small Canadian builder's shadow and reached for the standards set by the Great American Road. This wasn't a town-to-town hauler anymore. It was a true highway coach. The first MCI built to stand shoulder to shoulder with GM's Buffalo series and actually put up a real fight. That leap became possible in 1963, when Greyhound backed the construction of a new MCI plant in Pembina, North Dakota, the company's first foothold on U.S. soil. That factory didn't just add capacity, it changed MCI's identity. From that point on, MCI wasn't just Greyhound's Canadian partner. It was a North American manufacturer ready to build coaches for America, in America. Stepping into the MC-5 after those early MC models was like stepping into a different league. The proportions alone told you this was built for America's highways. A clean 35-foot length and a 96-inch width. The classic footprint that fits small-town depots just as easily as sweeping mountain curves. MCI shaped the body with a single passenger door up front, a gently arched roofline, and full underfloor luggage bays, the hallmarks of a true premium coach, not a commuter shuttle. Underneath that skin sat the feature that defined the MC-5's character, a semi-monocoque structure. Instead of riding on a separate frame, the body and chassis worked as one, giving the coach far greater torsional strength than many body-on-frame competitors. On rough pavement, or running fully loaded on long hauls, that stiffness paid off. The MC-5 felt planted, solid, and far less prone to flexing or rattling its way through the miles. Another practical touch was the dual baggage doors on each side, a layout that made loading easier and set MCI apart from several rivals still using older compartment styles. Everything about the design aimed at one idea: build a coach that could slip into tight spaces, handle real highway work, and avoid the bulk that later 40-foot models like the MC-7 and MC-8 carried. And with the MC-5, MCI finally settled on the look and stance that would become its modern DNA: a clean, purposeful silhouette built for North America's long roads. What truly brought the MC-5 to life wasn't just the way it looked, but the way it moved down the road. Behind the rear axle sat the same heart that powered so many American coaches of the era, a Detroit diesel two-stroke. Early MC-5s carried the compact 6V71, a 190 to 200 horsepower workhorse that loved to rev and delivered more punch than its size suggested. But as operators asked for more muscle, especially for mountain service, MCI offered the bigger 8V71, pushing output into the 280 to 300 horsepower range and giving the MC-5 the authority it needed on long grades. Paired with those engines was a choice of transmissions that defined the feel of the coach. The standard setup was a 4-speed Spicer manual, famous for its mechanical clack between gears and the firm, positive shifts older drivers still talk about. Later, 5A and 5B models added an Allison automatic, a welcome upgrade for urban or tourist operators who wanted smooth, no-nonsense driving on stop-and-go routes. Being a Detroit two-stroke, the MC-5 produced that unmistakable Detroit scream, a sharp, rising howl under load that echoed off canyon walls and downtown buildings alike. The Roots blower fed the cylinders with a steady push of air, giving the engine strong low-end torque and making the coach surprisingly sure-footed on steep, twisting climbs. Supporting all that mechanical energy was a full air suspension system, providing a level, steady ride that helped the MC-5 feel composed even on rougher pavement. The one weak spot early on was the HVAC system, which struggled in high heat. But MCI significantly improved cooling and airflow, beginning with the MC-5A. Altogether, the MC-5 didn't just run, it performed, combining grunt, stability, and that unforgettable Detroit soundtrack into one cohesive, highway-ready machine. The MC-5's mechanical personality only deepened as the model evolved, and that evolution came in 4 clear chapters. The very first MC-5, built from 1963 to 1964, was a small run, 266 production coaches, and 1 MC-X5 prototype. These early units carried the basic layout and styling that defined the line, but options were limited. They were the proof of concept, the first true highway coaches MCI sent into the American arena. The follow-up, the MC-5A, 1964 to 1970, was where the model truly found its footing. With 1,548 coaches produced, it became the most common and widely recognized version. Operators got tougher structural components, a far more reliable HVAC system, and better engine choices, including the stronger Detroit 8V71. The 5A is the version most older drivers remember, the one that showed MCI could match GM coach for coach. By the time the MC-5B arrived in 1971, MCI had begun refining the smaller details that mattered in daily service. Only 350 units were built through 1977, but the upgrades were practical. Improved wiring and electrical layouts, better corrosion resistance for harsh climates, and smarter interior and luggage bay arrangements that made maintenance easier. Then came the final chapter, the MC-5C, 1978 to 1980. With 380 coaches produced, it carried a front-end redesign inspired by the larger MC-8 and MC-9, giving the 5C a more modern, unified family look. But by this point, the market was shifting. Operators wanted 40-foot coaches with more seating and better economics, and the 35-foot segment began to fade. Still, each version of the MC-5 added a layer of refinement, moving MCI closer to the engineering philosophy that would make it a North American powerhouse in the decades to come. As the MC-5 evolved through its successive generations, it quietly built a footprint that stretched across nearly every corner of North America. Greyhound remained its biggest customer on both sides of the border, using the 35-footer on routes where a full-size 40-foot coach simply didn't make sense. In the Rockies, the Appalachians, and even up into Alaska, operators appreciated a bus that could snake through mountain passes without feeling oversized or sluggish. Outside the major line haul companies, the MC-5 found a second life with the kinds of organizations that needed reliability more than glamour. Universities put them to work hauling students across campus systems and regional trips. Churches bought them for youth groups and choir tours. Small-town sports teams rode them to away games, and local agencies used them as commuter shuttles in places where tight streets and old brick depots ruled out larger coaches. The terrain these buses covered was just as varied. You'd see MC-5s pulling into visitor centers at national parks in both the US and Canada, idling beside trailheads in the early morning chill. They ran through narrow downtown grids, dipping around hard corners that put longer coaches at risk. On charter duty, they handled long, quiet night runs with a steadiness that made passengers forget they were in a shorter rig. Drivers, especially the ones who'd spent years behind the wheel of larger machines, had a soft spot for the MC-5. Its shorter wheelbase made it easy to place on the road. The Detroit in the back pulled confidently on steep grades, and the cab, simple, open, with good sightlines, felt like a place where a driver could settle in and truly work with the machine instead of fighting it. Against the backdrop of all those real-world miles, the MC-5's place in the market becomes clearer when you stack it beside its competition. GM's PD4106 and PD4107 were its closest rivals. Same 35-foot length, same Detroit muscle, and backed by a name that had dominated American highways for decades. GM carried the prestige. Everyone knew what a Buffalo was. But the MC-5 earned loyalty in quieter ways. It was tougher than people expected, easier on maintenance budgets, and more flexible for operators who needed a smaller coach without paying GM prices. Inside MCI's own family, the MC-5 sat as the compact younger sibling to the bigger MC-7, MC-8, and MC-9. Those 40-foot coaches offered more seats, better economics, and eventually became the workhorses of the industry. By the late 1970s, the market's momentum had shifted heavily toward those longer models, making the 35-foot segment feel increasingly narrow. Even so, the MC-5 held on to advantages the big rigs couldn't match: a short wheelbase that made tight corners simple, a lower center of gravity that felt stable on twisting grades, cargo capacity that fit most small route needs, and operating costs that stayed comfortably low. For the jobs it was built for, it remained the right tool long after the spotlight moved on. When the charter work faded and the 35-foot market shrank, the MC-5 didn't disappear. It simply moved into a second life. That strong semi-monocoque structure, the same backbone that kept it tight and rattle-free on mountain routes, turned out to be perfect for motorhome conversions. Owners wanted a coach that wouldn't sag, flex, or fight them when they built cabinetry, plumbing, and full living quarters inside. The MC-5 gave them exactly that. Its 35-foot length also hit a sweet spot. It was long enough to build a real living space, yet short enough to fit into most national and state parks where longer rigs were restricted. And with a Detroit diesel in the back, a simple, parts-everywhere engine that any old-school mechanic could nurse along, long-term upkeep stayed affordable. Starting in the 1980s and running well into the 2000s, conversion shops and private owners turned MC-5s into rolling homes. Hardwood floors, full galleys, queen beds, the works. One well-known MC-5B conversion even sold for $44,900, proof that the platform still carried real value. Among RV enthusiasts, the MC-5 earned a nickname that stuck: a land yacht for the nostalgics, a highway cruiser with the soul of another era. As those motorhome conversions rolled across the country, the deeper meaning of the MC-5's journey became impossible to miss. This was the coach that proved MCI could stand on equal footing with the American market, not as a Canadian side project, but as a true builder of highway machinery. Without the MC-5, there would be no MC-7, no MC-8, no MC-9, the trio that went on to dominate charter and line haul service for decades. The MC-5 was the foundation stone that made that rise possible. In doing so, it quietly shifted the balance of power away from GM operators who once bought Buffalo coaches by default, now saw MCI as a serious contender. A builder whose machines were tough, simple to maintain, and built with the straightforward practicality North American fleets demanded. And when the industry moved almost entirely to 40-foot coaches after 1980, the 35-foot MC-5 faded from new sales, but gained something rarer: symbolism. It became the last widely used short MCI highway coach, the final representative of a generation built for tight towns, steep passes, and modest routes. Its legacy lives on, not just in what it did, but in what it made possible. If you ever rode one of these machines back in the day, maybe on a cold morning college trip, a church outing, a long Greyhound run through the mountains, or a family vacation into a national park, I'd love to hear your story. Drop your memories down in the comments and let the rest of us know what the MC-5 meant to you. And if you enjoyed this look back at one of MCI's most important coaches, give the video a like, share it with another bus fan, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into America's rolling history.